Marcus Daniels clutched his throat, gasping for air as the flight attendant's fingers dug deeper. First-class passengers froze in shock. His Harvard MBA and billion-dollar company meant nothing now. Darkness crept into his vision. Then came the click of a cell phone camera. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button now and subscribe to catch more unbelievable true stories of injustice that need to be told. What would you do if you witnessed something like this happening right before your eyes? Let's continue with this incredible story that will leave you speechless. Marcus Daniels had not always been the successful CEO of Horizon Technologies. Born in a struggling neighborhood in Detroit, his childhood was defined by determination against overwhelming odds. His mother, Elaine, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table after his father was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. The judicial system's bias had torn their family apart, but it also instilled in Marcus an unyielding resolve to succeed, despite a world stacked against him. By age 12, Marcus was already juggling school with his own side hustles, mowing lawns, washing cars, and helping elderly neighbors with errands. His teachers noticed his exceptional aptitude for mathematics and science, but few expected much from another kid from the East Side. Mrs. Calloway, his 8th grade science teacher, was different. She saw beyond his worn clothes and the exhaustion in his eyes from working before school. "You have a brilliant mind, Marcus," she told him one day after he'd aced another test. "But in this world, you'll need to be twice as good to get half as far. Are you ready for that journey?" That conversation changed everything. Marcus threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor. He graduated top of his high school class, earning a partial scholarship to University of Michigan. College wasn't easy. He worked night shifts at a gas station while maintaining perfect grades, but his technology skills began to shine. By junior year, he'd created a security software application that caught the attention of several tech companies. After graduation, Marcus landed a position at a mid-sized tech firm, where his innovative approaches quickly earned promotions. But the higher he climbed, the more isolated he felt. In executive meetings, he was often the only black face at the table. His ideas were questioned more thoroughly than those of his colleagues. When he pointed out market opportunities in underserved communities, he was told they weren't profitable demographics. At 32, frustrated by the limitations and microaggressions, Marcus took his boldest step yet. He mortgaged everything he owned, borrowed from every friend who believed in him, and launched Horizon Technologies. His vision: creating affordable technology solutions for healthcare, education, and small businesses in underserved markets. The first 2 years were brutal. Investors were skeptical. "Your market approach is unconventional," one venture capitalist said, which Marcus understood as code for too focused on non-white communities. Deals fell through at the last minute. Potential partners backed out without explanation. But Marcus persisted, refining his business model and proving the critics wrong. The breakthrough came when Horizon's security software prevented a major data breach at a regional hospital chain. Suddenly, the company that everyone doubted became the industry's rising star. Within 5 years, Horizon Technologies grew from a struggling startup to a corporate success story valued at over $1 billion. Marcus Daniels, the kid from Detroit whose guidance counselor once suggested he aim for something more realistic, was now featured in Fortune magazine as one of the most innovative CEOs in America. Today's flight to San Francisco was for the biggest meeting of his career, a potential partnership with global tech that would expand Horizon's solutions internationally. Marcus had prepared meticulously for this presentation, reviewing the proposal until he could recite it from memory. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with his signature subtle gold tie pin, a gift from his mother when he opened his first office, he exuded the confidence of someone who had earned his success through talent and tenacity. As the first-class flight attendant Heather Richardson approached with pre-departure drinks, Marcus politely asked for sparkling water with lime. She nodded without making eye contact, something he was unfortunately accustomed to, even in his expensive suit in the first-class cabin. He returned to reviewing his presentation notes, unaware that this routine business trip was about to turn into the most humiliating and dangerous confrontation of his professional life. What Marcus couldn't know was that Heather Richardson had been having the worst day of her 15-year career. The airline had recently implemented new policies that increased her workload while cutting staff benefits. She'd just ended a call with her manager, who denied her request for personal leave to care for her ailing mother. Her frustration was looking for a target, and unconscious biases were about to transform routine service into something far more sinister. As Marcus settled into his seat, he couldn't have imagined that within the hour, his hard-earned success, his dignity, and even his life would be threatened in ways he never thought possible in 2025 America. The sparkling water he requested would never arrive, but something much more disturbing was about to be served instead. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner to San Francisco was nearly ready for departure from Atlanta International Airport. Marcus had settled into seat 2A, his laptop open to finalize details for the global tech presentation. The cabin hummed with the quiet conversations of business travelers and the soft click of seatbelts fastening. When Heather returned with the drink cart, she served everyone in the first row their requested beverages with a practiced smile. When she reached Marcus, she bypassed him completely, moving to the passenger across the aisle. Marcus raised his hand politely. "Excuse me, I had asked for sparkling water with lime," he said with a professional smile. Heather's expression tightened. "I'll get to you when I get to you," she replied curtly, continuing to serve other passengers. Marcus blinked, surprised by the response but unwilling to create a scene. He returned to his work, assuming she was having a difficult day. 10 minutes passed and the drink service concluded. His seat remained the only one in first class without a beverage. He pressed the call button, which Heather ignored for several minutes before approaching with visible irritation. "What is it?" she asked, her tone making several nearby passengers glance up. "I still haven't received my drink," Marcus explained quietly. "Sparkling water with lime, please. We're preparing for takeoff." "You'll have to wait until we're airborne," she responded, reaching up to switch off his call button forcefully. Marcus noticed something troubling. She was still serving drinks to other passengers who had boarded after him. A white businessman across the aisle had just received a scotch on the rocks. Marcus took a deep breath, recognizing a familiar pattern but choosing to handle it with the same measured approach that had guided his career. "I understand you're busy," he said calmly, "but I can see you're still serving others. Is there a reason my request is being handled differently?" Heather's face flushed. "Are you accusing me of something?" "Not at all," Marcus replied. "I'm simply asking about my drink order." "I don't appreciate your tone," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Maybe you're not used to first-class rules." The implication was clear and stinging. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. An older white woman across the aisle averted her eyes, unwilling to witness the interaction. A younger man 2 rows back began recording discreetly with his phone. Marcus had experienced this type of treatment before, the assumption that he didn't belong in prestigious spaces, that his presence was somehow an intrusion. Throughout his career, he'd been mistaken for waitstaff at gala events where he was a keynote speaker, and had been asked to show additional ID when accessing VIP lounges, where his white colleagues walked through unchallenged. "I'm very familiar with first class," he responded evenly. "I fly over 50 times a year for business." "Well, then you should know that demanding special treatment isn't acceptable," Heather retorted, her voice escalating. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to inform the captain." Marcus was aware of the growing attention from other passengers. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. A few seemed to be forming judgments already. This was the tightrope. He'd walked his entire professional life, responding to unfair treatment without appearing to be the angry black man that could trigger even worse consequences. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he clarified. "Just the same service others are receiving." Heather leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Marcus could hear. "People like you are always looking for something to complain about, aren't you? Playing the victim card." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The familiar sting of being reduced to a stereotype despite all his accomplishments sent a flush of heat through his body. Before he could respond, the captain announced immediate takeoff, and Heather straightened up with a satisfied smile. "All passengers must now be seated with seatbelts fastened," she announced loudly before walking away. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. The presentation materials on his laptop screen blurred as he processed what had just happened. He'd built his success on choosing his battles wisely, knowing when to speak up and when to let things go. Was this one of those moments to practice strategic patience? Or was this exactly the kind of moment that needed to be addressed? As the plane began taxiing, Marcus noticed a text message from his executive assistant confirming the global tech meeting details. The stark contrast between being a respected CEO about to close a $100 million deal and being treated as unwelcome in this cabin wasn't lost on him. He took several deep breaths and decided to refocus on his presentation. The flight took off smoothly, climbing into the clear blue sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign turned off with a soft ding. Passengers began adjusting their seats and retrieving items from their bags. Marcus decided to try once more, pressing his call button again. This time, a different flight attendant approached, a younger man named Jason according to his name tag. "How can I help you, sir?" he asked with professional courtesy. "Could I please have sparkling water with lime?" Marcus requested. "Of course, I'll bring that right away," Jason replied. Minutes later, as Jason returned with the drink, Heather intercepted him, whispering something in his ear. Jason looked confused but handed the drink service back to her. Heather approached Marcus's seat, practically slamming the drink on his tray table, splashing water onto his laptop keyboard. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said without a hint of sincerity. Turbulence. There had been no turbulence. Several passengers had witnessed the deliberate action. Marcus carefully moved his laptop away from the spill, using his cocktail napkin to dry the keys. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice level despite the growing knot of tension in his chest. "The problem is passengers who think they're entitled to special treatment," Heather said loudly. "First class or not, you need to respect crew instructions." An older white businessman across the aisle finally spoke up. "He's been nothing but polite. Why are you treating him this way?" Heather turned, her demeanor instantly transforming. "I'm so sorry if it appears that way, sir. We've had some issues with this passenger making demands of the crew." The word issues hung in the air, laden with unspoken implications. Marcus recognized the dangerous territory this was entering. Throughout history, black men had been severely harmed or killed because someone claimed they were causing issues or being threatening when they were doing nothing wrong. "That's not true," Marcus stated firmly. "I simply asked for the same service everyone else received." Heather's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice. You're disturbing the cabin." Marcus hadn't raised his voice at all. The gaslighting technique was painfully familiar, painting him as aggressive when he'd been nothing but composed. He could feel his heart pounding as the situation escalated beyond reason. The businesswoman beside him, who had witnessed everything, looked deeply uncomfortable but remained silent. The all-too-common response of bystanders unwilling to get involved. As Marcus opened his mouth to respond, he was unaware that this confrontation was about to escalate far beyond a denied drink or spilled water. In moments, the incident would transform from a disturbing case of discrimination to something far more dangerous. A physical confrontation that would make national headlines and force America to once again confront the reality of racism in everyday spaces, even at 35,000 feet. The tension in the first-class cabin thickened as Heather returned with the flight's lead attendant, Patricia, a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Marcus noticed how Heather's body language had shifted. Arms crossed, defensively, chin tilted upward, standing slightly behind Patricia as if seeking protection. "Sir," Patricia addressed Marcus formally, "I understand there's been some disruption. We need you to comply with crew instructions for the safety of all passengers." Marcus felt a familiar sinking feeling. He was being painted as the problem despite being the one mistreated. He'd encountered this dynamic countless times. A situation would begin with someone else's bias, but somehow he would end up portrayed as the aggressor. "With all respect," Marcus replied calmly, "I've complied with every instruction. I simply requested the same service others received. When my drink was finally brought, it was deliberately spilled on my equipment." Patricia glanced at Heather, who quickly interjected. He's been combative since boarding, demanded special treatment, and became verbally abusive when told to wait. The businesswoman in 2B, who had witnessed everything, shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Her manicured fingers fidgeted with her pearl necklace, eyes averted. Marcus recognized her silence as a choice, a decision not to get involved. That felt like its own form of complicity. That's simply not true, Marcus stated, maintaining his composure. Several passengers witnessed the actual events. He gestured toward the man who had spoken up earlier. The businessman nodded reluctantly. He's right. He wasn't being disruptive at all. Patricia's expression remained unchanged. Sir, I need to see your boarding pass. Marcus provided it from his phone. Patricia studied it longer than necessary, as if searching for some discrepancy. Finding none, she asked, "And what brings you to first class today?" The question landed like a slap. The implication was clear. Patricia was questioning whether he belonged in first class at all. Marcus had earned Diamond Medallion status years ago through his frequent business travel. He'd paid for this seat just like everyone else. "I'm traveling for business," he replied evenly, refusing to justify his presence further. "And I'd appreciate being treated with the same respect as the other passengers." Patricia's lips thinned. "Sir, your tone is concerning me. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another section of the aircraft." A few gasps came from passengers who realized what was happening. Being asked to move from a first-class seat for which he'd paid would be humiliating and discriminatory. Marcus felt his professional mask starting to crack under the weight of this escalating injustice. "I will not be moving seats," he stated firmly. "I paid for this seat. I'm entitled to be here, and I expect to be treated with basic courtesy." "He's right," came a new voice, a young woman who had been quietly observing from across the aisle. "I've been recording this interaction, and he's been nothing but respectful while being treated unfairly." Heather's face flushed with anger. "Recording is against airline policy. You need to delete that immediately." The young woman, Amara Williams, a popular social media influencer with millions of followers, shook her head. "Actually, there's no expectation of privacy in public spaces, including commercial flights. And I'm glad I have this evidence." This unexpected support shifted the dynamic momentarily. Patricia hesitated, suddenly aware that the situation might be documented. "We're simply trying to ensure a comfortable flight for everyone," she said, her tone softening slightly. "Then perhaps you should address the actual disruption," Marcus suggested. "I've been treated differently than every other passenger in this cabin, and we all know why." Patricia stiffened. "Are you accusing our staff of discrimination, sir?" "I'm stating what's happening," Marcus replied. "Draw your own conclusions." The standoff might have ended there, with uncomfortable tension but no further escalation, if not for what happened next. A white male passenger in row 3 who had been drinking heavily pre-flight stood up unsteadily. "Just move him back where he belongs," the man slurred loudly. "First class has standards." The cabin went silent. The naked prejudice hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt a cold rage building inside him, not at the drunk passenger, whose bigotry was at least transparent, but at the system that empowered Heather and Patricia to weaponize their authority against him while maintaining a veneer of professionalism. "Sir, please return to your seat," Patricia told the drunk passenger, but her admonishment lacked the stern authority she'd used with Marcus. The double standard was glaring. The drunk man stumbled back to his seat, muttering additional slurs, just loudly enough to be heard. Patricia turned back to Marcus with a practiced look of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's not let one passenger's inappropriate comment escalate this situation further," she said, as if the drunk man was the beginning of the problem rather than just its most obvious symptom. "If you can remain in your seat quietly for the remainder of the flight, we can put this matter behind us." The condescension in her tone was unbearable, as if he were a child being disciplined rather than a passenger who had been mistreated. Marcus took a deep breath, weighing his options. He was minutes away from the most important business meeting of his career. Creating a scene could jeopardize everything he'd worked for. but allowing this treatment to continue unchallenged felt like betraying every principle he stood for. "I don't need to be quiet," he replied steadily. "I need to be treated with the same respect as every other passenger. That includes receiving the service I paid for without hostility or discrimination." Patricia's face hardened. "Sir, this is your final warning. If you continue to disrupt this flight, I'll be forced to take more serious measures." "Documenting discriminatory treatment isn't disruption," Marcus responded. "It's accountability." The word accountability visibly triggered Heather, who stepped forward, her finger pointing directly at Marcus's face. "You people always think you're victims. You're the one causing problems here." "Heather," Patricia cautioned, too late. The mask had slipped. "You people," echoed through the cabin. Several passengers looked away in embarrassment. Others watched, with uncomfortable fascination. A few began recording discreetly on their phones. Marcus maintained his composure, though his heart raced. "I'd like to speak to the captain, please," he requested firmly. "This situation needs to be addressed properly." "The captain is busy flying the plane," Patricia replied dismissively. "He's authorized me to handle cabin issues as I see fit." "Then I'd like your employee ID numbers and the customer service contact information," Marcus continued. "I'll be filing a formal complaint about this treatment." Heather leaned down until her face was inches from his. "File whatever you want. No one will believe you over us. It'll be your word against ours." "Actually," Amara interjected again, holding up her phone, "it won't." What happened next occurred so quickly that later, witnesses would give conflicting accounts. As Heather turned sharply toward Amara, her arm swung back, knocking Marcus's sparkling water directly into his lap. When he stood reflexively, Heather screamed, "He's attacking me!" and grabbed his collar. In her panic, real or manufactured, her hands slipped from his collar to his throat. Her fingers pressed into his windpipe with shocking force. Marcus, caught completely by surprise, gasped for air as Heather's grip tightened. His vision began to dim at the edges, black spots dancing before his eyes. Passengers erupted in confusion. Some shouted for her to stop. Others, seeing only a black man standing and a white woman screaming, moved to intervene against Marcus rather than his attacker. Within seconds, chaos engulfed the first-class cabin. What do you think about Marcus's situation? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discriminatory treatment while traveling? Comment number 1 if you believe Marcus should file formal charges, or number 2 if you think he should focus on his important business meeting and move forward. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their appearance, and subscribe to hear what happens next in this shocking true story. What would you do if you were in Marcus's shoes, choking and unable to defend yourself without being perceived as the aggressor? The next part of this story will reveal how a simple cell phone completely changed the course of events. Stay tuned. The pressure on Marcus's windpipe intensified. His lungs burned for oxygen as Heather's fingers dug deeper into his throat. The chaos around them seemed distant now, muffled by the roaring in his ears. His briefcase slipped from his grasp, presentation, materials scattering across the cabin floor. In this moment, his accomplished career, his company, his identity as a respected CEO, none of it mattered. He was reduced to a primal struggle for air. Jason, the younger flight attendant who had initially tried to serve Marcus, pushed through the crowd. "Heather, stop! What are you doing?" He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her away. Marcus collapsed back into his seat, coughing violently, his hand flying to his bruised throat. "He attacked me!" Heather shrieked, her voice breaking with manufactured fear. "Did you see how he lunged at me?" Jason looked confused, glancing between Heather's unmarked appearance and Marcus's obvious distress. "I didn't see that." "I've got the whole thing on video," Amara announced, her phone still recording. "She attacked him, not the other way around." "So do I," added a college student from row 4, holding up his phone. "And I started filming when she was refusing to serve him." Patricia's face drained of color as she realized multiple passengers had documented the incident. The narrative she and Heather had tried to create was unraveling in real time. "Everyone needs to return to their seats immediately," she commanded. her voice lacking its previous authority. "This is an internal airline matter." Marcus, still struggling to regain his breath, managed to speak hoarsely. "This stopped being an internal matter when your employee assaulted me." The businessman who had spoken up earlier stood now. "I'm Dr. Raymond Wilson, Chief of Surgery at Massachusetts. General, this man needs medical attention. His trachea may be bruised or damaged." Patricia hesitated, visibly calculating the airline's exposure. "The first aid kit has everything needed to—" "What he needs," Dr. Wilson interrupted firmly, "is to be seen by emergency medical personnel. And what you need is to inform the captain that we have a situation requiring immediate landing." Marcus felt something he hadn't expected in this nightmare scenario: the solidarity of strangers. The same passengers who had sat in uncomfortable silence minutes before were now speaking up, offering their recordings as evidence, confirming his account of events. The realization was both heartening and bitter. It had taken a physical assault, captured on camera, for his humanity to be fully recognized. Amara had moved to sit beside him, offering a bottle of water. "Small sips," she advised gently. "I've already uploaded the video to my private cloud storage. They can't delete the evidence." Within minutes, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 10 minutes. Heather and Patricia had retreated to the galley, whispering intensely. Marcus could see the panic in their expressions as they realized the magnitude of what had transpired. The drunk passenger who had made the racist comments earlier was now slumped in his seat, pretending to be asleep. As the plane began its descent, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his executive assistant. "Presentation pushed to tomorrow. Global Tech CEO understanding. Focus on yourself." He stared at the message, processing the immediate professional impact of this incident. Would Global Tech still want to partner with his company after this? Would this become another burden he'd have to overcome because of someone else's prejudice? The plane landed smoothly despite the expedited approach. As they taxied to the gate, 2 police officers and a medical team were already waiting on the tarmac. Marcus touched the tender skin of his throat, knowing it would show bruising soon. Evidence of what happened to him would be visible to the world. The captain emerged from the cockpit, a tall man with a weathered face and gray temples. He surveyed the scene with concern. "I need to speak with the individual requiring medical attention and any witnesses to what occurred." Patricia, stepped forward. "Captain Jenkins, I can brief you on the situation. A passenger became aggressive during service and—" "That's a lie," several voices interrupted simultaneously. The captain raised his hand for silence. "I'd like to hear directly from those involved." Marcus rose slowly, still dizzy from the assault. "My name is Marcus Daniels. I'm the CEO of Horizon Technologies. Your flight attendant denied me service, spilled a drink on me deliberately, and then physically assaulted me by choking me when I asked to file a complaint." Captain Jenkins's expression remained professional, but his eyes widened slightly. "Is there evidence of this allegation?" "Multiple videos from different passengers," Amara confirmed, stepping forward. "I've already shared them with several news outlets and posted them to social media. The story's trending." This information visibly impacted the captain, who understood the potential public relations disaster unfolding. "I see. Medical personnel will attend to Mr. Daniels first. Police will take statements from all witnesses. No one is to delete any recordings." As the medical team boarded and began examining Marcus's throat, Patricia attempted damage control. "Captain, company policy requires an internal investigation before any public statements are made. Company policy also prohibits assaulting passengers," Captain Jenkins replied curtly. "My primary concern is the safety of everyone on this aircraft and ensuring proper medical care for an injured passenger." The paramedics confirmed what Dr. Wilson had suspected. Marcus had suffered trauma to his trachea that required hospital evaluation. As they prepared to transport him, Marcus caught fragments of conversation from nearby passengers. Did you see how they tried to make him look like the aggressor? If there hadn't been videos... My daughter flies alone next week. I'm terrified. This could happen to her. As Marcus was guided toward the exit, Heather and Patricia were being interviewed separately by police officers. The reality of their actions seemed to be dawning on them at last. Heather's face had crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Patricia maintained a rigid posture, her lips pressed into a thin line. At the door, Marcus paused, turning back to the cabin. The faces of the passengers who had witnessed his humiliation and assault stared back at him. Some looked ashamed of their initial silence, others nodded in solidarity, and a few appeared confused, still processing what they had seen. In that moment, Marcus realized this incident would transcend his personal experience. It would become another data point in America's ongoing reckoning with racism, analyzed, debated, and ultimately judged by a society still struggling to confront its deepest biases. As he was escorted onto the jetway where a gurney waited, Marcus's phone began buzzing incessantly with notifications. The video was spreading across social media platforms at lightning speed. By the time he reached the ambulance, justice for Marcus was already trending nationwide. His private humiliation had become a public referendum on how Black Americans are treated in spaces where they've earned their place, but are still made to feel they don't belong. In the ambulance, as a paramedic applied an ice pack to his throat, Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed by competing emotions. Relief that he had survived, rage at the injustice, anxiety about the public spectacle his life had suddenly become, and beneath it all, a weary recognition that despite all his achievements, the Ivy League degree, the successful company, the tailored suit, he could still be reduced to fighting for his basic dignity, and even his breath, because of the color of his skin. The ambulance doors closed, and Marcus Daniels, tech innovator and business leader, was whisked away to Charlotte Medical Center, unaware that his traumatic experience was about to ignite a national conversation that would reach all the way to the White House. The emergency room at Charlotte Medical Center buzzed with activity as Marcus sat on an examination table, a doctor carefully assessing the bruising on his neck. X-rays had confirmed no permanent damage to his trachea, but the physical evidence of the assault was unmistakable. Dark purple finger marks stained his brown skin like an accusation. "You're lucky," Dr. Patel remarked, applying a soothing ointment to the affected area. "The bruising is significant, but there's no structural damage. You'll experience discomfort when swallowing for about a week, and your voice may be hoarse. I'm prescribing anti-inflammatory medication and recommending vocal rest." Marcus nodded, wincing at the movement. Speaking was painful, each word scraping against his injured throat. "When can I travel again?" he asked hoarsely. "Medically, you could fly tomorrow, but I'd recommend waiting at least 48 hours, Dr. Patel advised. "The pressure changes could exacerbate your discomfort. The Global Tech meeting would have to be rescheduled or conducted virtually." Marcus made a mental note to call his executive team once he was discharged. As the doctor finished his examination, a hospital administrator knocked tentatively on the door. "Mr. Daniels, there are police officers who need your statement and..." She hesitated. "There's a situation developing outside the hospital. News vans, reporters, the video of your incident has gone viral." Marcus's heart sank. He'd been so focused on his immediate medical needs that he hadn't checked his phone in hours. Now, unlocking the screen, he was bombarded with thousands of notifications. His email inbox had exploded. Missed calls from his executive team, board members, family, friends, and dozens of unknown numbers cluttered his call log. Opening Twitter, he saw Justice for Marcus trending at #1 nationwide. The original video posted by Amara had over 20 million views and climbing. Major news networks were running the footage on constant rotation. His name was everywhere. A police detective entered, notebook in hand. "Mr. Daniels, I'm Detective Rivera. When you're feeling up to it, I'd like to take your statement about what occurred on the flight." Marcus recounted the events as clinically as possible, from the initial drink denial to the escalation and physical assault. Detective Rivera took detailed notes, asking clarifying questions about the sequence of events and who had witnessed each interaction. We've already collected statements and contact information from 12 passengers who corroborate your account, the detective informed him. We've also secured the airline's internal communication logs and will be requesting their camera footage, though they're already claiming technical difficulties with the recording system. Of course they are, Marcus replied, unsurprised. What charges is Heather facing? We've arrested her for assault, though the district attorney will make final charging decisions. The airline has already placed her and the lead flight attendant on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Marcus nodded, considering his next steps. I want to be clear. I'm not looking for special treatment. I just want the same accountability that would exist if roles were reversed. Detective Rivera's expression was unreadable. Sir, with all due respect, if roles were reversed and you had put your hands on her throat, we'd likely be having this conversation in a holding cell, not a hospital room. The stark truth of this statement hung in the air between them. Marcus knew Detective Rivera was right. A black man accused of assaulting a white female flight attendant would likely have been restrained on the plane, possibly injured in the process, arrested immediately upon landing and villainized in media coverage before any facts were established. As the detective finished taking his statement, Marcus's phone rang. It was his company's chief counsel, Diana Washington. Marcus, I've got the legal team assembled and ready to move on this, Diana began without preamble. The airline's general counsel has already reached out about a settlement. They're in full damage control mode. I'm not interested in a quick payoff, Marcus replied, his voice strengthening despite the pain. This isn't about money. I understand, Diana assured him, but you should know what you're dealing with. The video has over 50 million views now. You're trending in 13 countries. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they're all covering it. Your inbox probably has interview requests from every major outlet. Marcus closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. What had happened to him was being dissected by strangers worldwide. His trauma was now public property, a talking point for cable news panels and social media debates. Some would see him as a victim deserving justice. Others would scrutinize his every word and action, looking for something, anything, to justify Heather's behavior. There's more, Diana continued hesitantly. Global Tech's CEO, Thomas Wilson, issued a statement expressing shock at what happened to you and postponing the meeting until you're recovered. But privately, some board members are worried about the publicity affecting the deal. Of course they were. Marcus had seen this dynamic before. Companies eager to partner with a successful black entrepreneur until that success came with complications, like highlighting racial injustice. Suddenly, his value proposition included an element of risk. Tell them if they're concerned about partnering with a company whose CEO expects basic human dignity, they're not the right partner for us anyway, Marcus said firmly. After ending the call, Marcus scrolled through some of the social media responses to the video. Most expressed outrage on his behalf, but there were also the inevitable attempts to justify what happened or question his behavior before the recording started. Some conservative commentators were already suggesting he must have done something to provoke the attack. A knock at the door interrupted his browsing. A nurse entered with discharge papers, followed by Marcus's chief of staff, Tariq Johnson, who had flown in from Atlanta immediately after seeing the news. Car's waiting whenever you're ready, Tariq informed him, taking in Marcus's injured appearance with barely concealed anger. We've booked you a suite at the Ritz-Carlton under a pseudonym. Security team is already there. Security team? Marcus questioned. Tariq's expression was grim. You've received threats, boss. Most are just keyboard warriors, but we're not taking chances. The hotel is implementing full privacy protocols. The realization that his safety was now at risk, that people were threatening him for having the audacity to be assaulted, struck Marcus with fresh outrage. This was the twisted reality of being black in America. Even as a victim, he wasn't safe from those who resented him for exposing uncomfortable truths. As they prepared to leave through a private hospital exit, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Baby, I'm seeing you all over the news. Call me as soon as you can. Praying for you. The message pierced through Marcus's professional armor, reminding him of the personal toll this incident was taking. His mother, who had sacrificed everything for his success, was now watching her son being brutalized on national television. The thought made his chest tighten with emotion. In the secure vehicle heading to the hotel, Marcus stared out the tinted windows at Charlotte's skyline, contemplating his next moves. He had built his career by turning obstacles into opportunities, by refusing to let discrimination define his path. Now, thrust into this unwanted spotlight, he faced a critical decision: retreat into privacy to protect himself and his company, or use this platform to address the larger systemic issues his experience represented. By the time they reached the hotel, Josker Justice for Marcus had been joined by Dosker Horizon Technology stands and Dosker First Class while black in the trending topics. Marcus's personal trauma had become a cultural moment, a symbol of the persistent reality of racism in spaces where money and achievement were supposed to be the great equalizers. As he settled into the hotel suite, surrounded by his hastily assembled crisis team, Marcus realized the assault on that plane had changed something fundamental. For years, he had navigated discrimination with strategic patience, choosing when to speak up and when to focus on his goals. Now, with the world watching and waiting for his response, that careful balance had been irrevocably disrupted. What happened next would define not just how this specific incident was resolved, but potentially shape how similar situations would be handled in the future. As Marcus scrolled through the thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of discrimination in travel, business, and daily life, he understood that his response now carried weight beyond his personal vindication. The question wasn't just what justice would look like for Marcus Daniels, CEO, but what justice might look like for countless others who hadn't had their moments of degradation captured on video and broadcast to the world. By morning, the Ritz-Carlton suite had transformed into an impromptu command center. Marcus sat at the dining table surrounded by his executive team and legal counsel, his throat wrapped in a medical collar that made his voice raspier than usual. On 3 different screens, news channels played with muted volume, all featuring the same footage of Heather's hands around Marcus's neck. Diana Washington, Horizon's chief counsel, was reviewing the airline's latest communication. Sky America's CEO has requested a private video call with you at 11. Their initial statement was weak, boilerplate about investigating the incident and taking appropriate action. The public isn't buying it. Social media metrics displayed on another laptop showed the hashtags continuing to gain traction. Celebrity influencers, athletes, and even politicians were weighing in. The story had transcended business news to become a cultural flashpoint. What's their angle likely to be? Marcus asked, sipping tea with honey to soothe his injured throat. Standard crisis management playbook, Diana replied. Express shock and concern, distance themselves from the employee's actions, offer compensation, request discretion during their internal process. Tariq Johnson leaned forward. Translation: they want to pay you off and shut this down before it damages their stock price further. He pulled up a financial chart showing Sky America's shares had dropped 17% since market opening. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And what are our options? Yvonne Decker, Horizon's PR director, outlined 3 potential approaches. We can settle quietly and focus on moving forward with business. We can pursue maximum legal penalties while maintaining a dignified public silence. Or we can use this platform to address the systemic issues at play, which carries both risks and opportunities for Horizon's brand. The team discussed each option's implications, weighing personal justice against corporate responsibility and strategic business interests. Throughout the conversation, Marcus remained quiet, listening intently. Finally, he spoke. Before we decide anything, I want to hear from some of the other passengers. The team exchanged glances. Is that wise from a legal standpoint? Diana asked cautiously. Maybe not, Marcus admitted. But this isn't just a legal situation. Several people on that plane eventually stood up for me. Others recorded what happened. I want to understand their perspectives before I make any decisions. Within an hour, his team had arranged calls with 3 key witnesses: Dr. Raymond Wilson, who had provided medical assessment on the plane; Amara Williams, the influencer whose video had gone viral; and Michael Chen, a law professor who had been seated nearby. Dr. Wilson spoke first, his voice grave. Mr. Daniels, I've been flying first class with Sky America for 20 years. I've Never witnessed anything like what happened to you. As a white man, I've never had my presence questioned or my requests ignored. What I saw was textbook discrimination escalating to assault. Amara Williams was blunt in her assessment. This isn't just about one racist flight attendant. It's about a system where Patricia felt comfortable backing Heather's behavior, where other staff didn't intervene, where passengers initially stayed silent. My followers are sharing thousands of similar experiences, not all ending in physical assault, but all following the same pattern of escalating discrimination. Professor Chen offered a legal perspective. The airline is likely most concerned about the precedent this sets. If they admit fault, they're acknowledging a culture that enables racial discrimination. That opens the door to class action possibilities from other passengers who've experienced similar treatment without video evidence. After these conversations, Marcus sat quietly, processing everything he'd heard. His executive team waited for his decision, understanding its importance beyond the immediate crisis. "Here's what we're going to do," he finally announced. "I'm not interested in a private settlement that buries this incident. I want structural changes that prevent this from happening to anyone else." He outlined his requirements: a comprehensive, anti-bias training program for all airline staff, transparent reporting of discrimination complaints, an independent review of the airline's corporate culture, financial consequences tied to executives' compensation if incidents continued, and a public acknowledgement of the systemic nature of the problem. And yes, he added, appropriate consequences for Heather and Patricia. But that's actually the least important element to me. Firing 2 employees doesn't fix a broken system. At exactly 11, the video call with Sky America's CEO, Richard Blackwell, began. The airline executive appeared solemn, flanked by his own legal team. "Mr. Daniels, first let me express my sincere apologies for what happened on our aircraft. The behavior displayed is completely unacceptable and against everything our company stands for." Marcus listened to the carefully crafted statement, noting the passive language that avoided direct acknowledgement of racism or discrimination. When Blackwell finished his prepared remarks and transitioned to discussing a generous compensation package, Marcus interrupted. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm not interested in hush money. I'm interested in change." He proceeded to outline his requirements, watching the CEO's expression shift from sympathetic to concerned as the list continued. When Marcus finished, Blackwell cleared his throat. "While we appreciate your suggestions, Mr. Daniels, we have established procedures for addressing service incidents. Perhaps we could discuss a more conventional resolution?" "This wasn't a service incident," Marcus replied firmly. "Your employee assaulted me because of racial bias, after your lead attendant enabled escalating discrimination. That's not a customer service problem. It's a human rights violation." The call ended with no resolution, Sky America's team promising to consider Marcus's proposals. Minutes later, his phone lit up with a text from Amara. They just issued another statement, throwing Heather under the bus completely. No mention of systemic issues. Check Twitter. Sky America's new statement announced Heather's termination, described her actions as reprehensible and not representative of our values, and offered a generic commitment to reviewing our training procedures. What would you do if you were in Marcus's position? Comment number 1 if you believe he should accept the airline's response and move forward, or comment number 2 if you think he should push for the systemic changes he outlined. Like this video if you believe corporations should be held accountable for creating environments where discrimination flourishes, and subscribe to find out what Marcus decides to do next. The question now wasn't whether Marcus would get justice for himself, but whether this incident would become another fleeting moment of outrage or a catalyst for meaningful change. What would you do if the spotlight suddenly fell on your traumatic experience? Would you retreat from it, or would you use it to fight for others facing the same invisible barriers every day? The next part of this story reveals how Marcus transformed personal pain into powerful advocacy, but at what cost to himself and his company? The conference room in Charlotte's Ritz-Carlton hummed with tension as Marcus reviewed the latest developments with his team. His throat still ached from the assault, but something else fueled him now, a steely determination that had crystallized during a sleepless night. Sky America thinks firing one employee and issuing a boilerplate apology will make this disappear, he said, voice still raspy. They're wrong. On the wall-mounted screen, Sky America's stock continued its downward trajectory. The company had miscalculated badly. Their attempt to isolate the incident to a single bad Apple employee had backfired spectacularly. Social media was flooded with accounts from other black passengers sharing similar experiences with the airline, though few had escalated to physical assault. Yvonne Decker, Horizon's PR director, scrolled through her tablet. The narrative is shifting. People are asking why Patricia wasn't also terminated. Aviation blogs are digging up the airline's history of discrimination complaints. 3 major civil rights organizations have reached out wanting to partner with you. Marcus nodded, considering the landscape. What's the latest from Global Tech? Terry handed him a tablet displaying an email from Thomas Wilson, Global Tech's CEO. They're still committed to the partnership. Wilson says he admires how you're handling this and wants to proceed with negotiations once you've recovered. It was a small but significant victory. Marcus had worried the controversy might spook potential business partners, but Global Tech's response suggested the opposite, that his principled stance was enhancing rather than damaging his company's reputation. Good, Marcus said. Now let's talk about our next move. Rather than rushing to the media with his story, Marcus had decided on a strategic approach. His team had spent the morning crafting a comprehensive response that would shift the conversation from a single incident to the broader pattern it represented. We're ready with the open letter, Diana confirmed. Legal has vetted it thoroughly. It's strong but factual, focuses on systemic issues rather than attacking individuals, and includes concrete action items for the airline industry as a whole. Marcus reviewed the document one final time. The letter detailed his experience clinically, but powerfully, connecting it to research on discrimination in customer service and transportation. It called for specific industry-wide reforms, standardized anti-bias training, transparent reporting of discrimination complaints, independent audits of corporate culture, and accountability measures tied to executive compensation. Most importantly, it announced the creation of the Equal Skies Initiative, a new nonprofit that would track discrimination in air travel, provide legal support to victims, and work with airlines committed to improvement. Seed it with $5 million from my personal foundation, Marcus instructed. I want this to have immediate credibility and staying power. His team exchanged glances. This was a major financial commitment for a cause born from personal trauma. But they recognized the strategic brilliance of the move. By transforming his individual experience into an institutional response, Marcus was changing the narrative from a viral moment to a movement. What about the interview requests? Yvonne asked. Every major network wants you. Marcus considered carefully. 1 interview, tomorrow morning. National reach, respected journalist, live format so they can't edit my words. They selected a veteran morning show host, known for fair but thorough questioning. The prep session for the interview was intensive, with his team playing devil's advocate and challenging him with the hardest questions they could imagine. Throughout it all, Marcus maintained a calm focus that impressed even his closest advisors. That evening, as final preparations were underway, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Amara Williams, the influencer whose recording had catapulted the incident into the national consciousness, had requested a brief meeting. I didn't do it for the views, she said immediately upon entering his suite. I need you to know that. I record incidents like this because I've been on the receiving end too many times, with no proof afterward. Marcus nodded in understanding. You don't owe me any explanation. Your quick thinking preserved the truth when they were trying to distort it. Amara hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. I've been contacted by other Sky America employees, flight attendants of color who've documented a pattern of discriminatory practices, but were afraid to come forward. They're willing to speak now, with your support. This was exactly the kind of systemic evidence that could transform individual justice into industry-wide accountability. Marcus arranged for these whistleblowers to connect with the legal team, building the Equal Skies Initiative. The following morning, Dressed in a charcoal suit with his signature subtle gold tie pin, Marcus sat across from veteran journalist Eleanor Reynolds on American Morning. His bruises were still visible despite makeup, a visual testimony to the violence he had experienced. "Mr. Daniels, thank you for being here," Eleanor began. "The video of your assault has shocked millions of Americans. Can you take us through what happened before the recording started?" With measured precision, Marcus recounted the events leading to the assault, the initial service denial, the escalation, and the physical attack. His tone remained factual rather than accusatory, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. "Some commentators have suggested there must have been provocative behavior on your part that wasn't captured on video," Eleanor noted. "How do you respond to that?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Those suggestions reflect exactly the problem I experienced on that flight, the assumption that a black person must have done something to deserve mistreatment. 12 independent witnesses and multiple videos confirm I did nothing wrong. The question we should be asking isn't what I did to provoke assault, but why society is so ready to assume I must have done something." The interview continued with Marcus skillfully redirecting focus from the individual incident to the pattern it represented. When Eleanor asked about his feelings toward Heather, his response was unexpected. "I don't harbor personal animosity toward her. She's a symptom of a larger problem. What concerns me more is the system that empowered her, the supervisor who backed her discriminatory behavior, and the corporate culture that likely made her feel such actions were acceptable." As the interview concluded, Marcus unveiled the Equal Skies Initiative, explaining its mission to address discrimination in air travel systematically, rather than anecdotally. Social media exploded with support. The hashtag #EqualSkies quickly joining #Justice for Marcus in trending topics. By afternoon, 3 major airlines had issued statements committing to work with the initiative. Sky America, conspicuously absent from this group, saw their stock drop an additional 8%. Industry analysts began questioning the company's leadership and risk management practices. That evening, Marcus received a call from Richard Blackwell. The Sky America CEO's tone had shifted dramatically from their previous conversation. "Mr. Daniels, I've reviewed your proposed changes in detail," Blackwell began, the forced conviviality gone from his voice. "We're prepared to implement the anti-bias training program, transparency reporting, and independent cultural audit you suggested. We'd also like to discuss having you personally involved in reshaping our approach to these issues." Marcus listened without interrupting, recognizing the desperation behind the olive branch. Sky America was hemorrhaging both market value and public trust. Their survival now depended on demonstrating meaningful change. "That's a start," Marcus replied. "Have your team contact the Equal Skies Initiative directly. They'll establish metrics to ensure these aren't empty promises." After ending the call, Marcus stood by the hotel window overlooking Charlotte's skyline, reflection mingling with the city lights. In just 48 hours, his life had transformed in ways he couldn't have predicted. The assault had been traumatic, but his response had potentially created a pathway to industry-wide reform. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "So proud of you, baby. Your daddy would be too. You're turning pain into purpose, just like you always have." The message brought unexpected tears to his eyes. Through everything, the assault, the public exposure, the strategic planning, he hadn't allowed himself to fully process the emotional impact of being attacked simply for existing in a space where someone felt he didn't belong. As night fell over Charlotte, Marcus Daniels stood at a crossroads. The immediate crisis was evolving into something more substantial, a platform from which to address long-standing inequities. But the personal cost remained to be calculated, and the most difficult challenges were yet to come. 3 days after the assault, Marcus sat in a private meeting room at Horizon Technologies' Atlanta headquarters. The bruises on his neck had darkened to a deep purple, visible evidence of the violence he'd endured. His voice had strengthened, though it still carried a slight rasp that his team noticed but didn't mention. Diana Washington entered, her expression grave. "We have a situation," she announced without preamble. "Sky America's legal team just sent this over." She placed a document on the table. Marcus skimmed its contents, his jaw tightening. Despite their public commitments, behind the scenes, Sky America was playing hardball. The document outlined a counter-narrative they were preparing to release, suggesting Marcus had been intoxicated, had made inappropriate comments to Heather, and had a history of difficult behavior on previous flights. "It's all fabricated," Marcus said, pushing the paper away. "They're trying to muddy the waters." "Of course it is," Diana agreed, "but they're desperate. Their stock is in freefall, they're facing boycotts, and 3 major corporate accounts have already announced they're switching carriers." Tariq entered with more troubling news. "They're not just fighting in the legal arena. Look at this." He displayed several social media accounts that had begun circulating rumors about Marcus's personal and professional life, false claims about Horizon's business practices, manufactured stories about Marcus's treatment of employees, and even doctored photos showing him at fictional wild parties were spreading across platforms. "Coordinated disinformation campaign," Tariq explained. "Professional job. They're trying to destroy your credibility before you can do more damage to their brand." Marcus absorbed this information silently. He had anticipated resistance, but the viciousness of the counterattack surprised even him. Sky America was willing to destroy a man's reputation rather than acknowledge and address systemic racism within their organization. "There's more," Diana added reluctantly. "Heather Richardson has hired Gloria Simmons." The room fell silent. Gloria Simmons was a high-profile attorney known for representing clients in racially charged cases, always defending those accused of racism rather than its victims. Her playbook was well established. Attack the character of the accuser, reframe the narrative to position her client as the true victim, and leverage media connections to spread doubt. "She's scheduled a press conference for this afternoon," Diana continued. "Based on her past cases, she'll likely claim Heather feared for her safety and acted in self-defense. The absurdity of this potential claim, that a seated passenger in a confined space somehow presented a threat requiring strangulation, would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous." Marcus had seen this strategy work before, had watched, as victims were transformed into villains in the public imagination through strategic character assassination. "They're betting that enough people want to believe I deserved what happened," Marcus observed quietly. "We need to respond aggressively," Yvonne urged. "Get ahead of their narrative before it takes hold." Marcus considered his options carefully. A direct counterattack might preserve his personal reputation, but would shift focus away from the systemic issues at stake. It would become a he said, she said media circus rather than a movement for change. "No," he decided finally. "We don't play their game. We stick to our strategy." His team looked uncertain. "Marcus, they're coming after you personally," Diana reminded him. "Your reputation, your company's reputation, everything you've built." "I know," he acknowledged, "but responding to their allegations just legitimizes them. Instead, let's release the complete footage from all passenger videos, unedited, with timestamps. Let people see the full context of what happened." Tariq nodded slowly, understanding the approach. Truth as the ultimate defense. "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "And simultaneously, we accelerate the Equal Skies initiative. Announce our first partnership with civil rights organizations. Release the data we've been collecting on discrimination complaints across airlines. Keep the focus on the systemic issue, not on me as an individual." As predicted, Gloria Simmons's press conference that afternoon was a masterclass in deflection and character assassination. Standing beside a tearful Heather Richardson, she painted a picture of a flight attendant intimidated by an aggressive, entitled passenger who had made her fear for her safety. "My client has served passengers of all backgrounds with dignity and respect for 15 years, Simmons declared. "This single incident, taken out of context and weaponized on social media, does not reflect who she is. We have witnesses who will testify to Mr. Daniels's belligerent behavior before the recording began." These supposed witnesses were never named, nor did they materialize in subsequent days. But the damage was done. A counter-narrative had been introduced, giving those predisposed to doubt Marcus's experience something to cling to. Cable news segments debated whether Marcus had provoked the attack. Social media filled with armchair analyses of the video, with some commenters scrutinizing Marcus's every movement and expression for signs of aggression that simply weren't there. Right-wing commentators suggested the entire incident was orchestrated to damage a patriotic American company. Through it all, Marcus maintained his strategic focus. Rather than engaging directly with the smear campaign, he channeled his energy into building the Equal Skies initiative. Within a week, the organization had partnered with 3 civil rights groups, launched a reporting platform for travelers to document discrimination, and begun discussions with 2 major airlines about implementing bias training programs. The counterattack reached its peak when an anonymous insider at Horizon Technologies contacted several news outlets claiming the company was on the verge of bankruptcy and that Marcus had orchestrated the plane incident as a distraction. The allegation was patently false. Horizon's financial statements were public and showed a company in excellent health, but stock analysts still had to address the rumors, temporarily depressing Horizon's share price. In response, Marcus made a calculated decision. He released Horizon's latest financial projections a week early, showing record growth in the pending global tech partnership, which had not only proceeded despite the controversy, but had expanded in scope. The stock rebounded immediately, rising to an all-time high. Marcus also leveraged unexpected allies. Dr. Raymond Wilson, the surgeon who had assisted him on the plane, published an op-ed in the New England Journal of Medicine about the medical aspects of the assault and the psychological phenomenon of bystander intervention. Amara Williams produced a documentary-style video featuring interviews with multiple passengers, all confirming Marcus's account. Most surprisingly, Jason, the young flight attendant who had pulled Heather away, came forward publicly. Despite pressure from the airline, he provided a sworn statement detailing not only what he'd witnessed during the assault, but also a pattern of similar behavior from Heather and Patricia toward passengers of color over the years. His testimony revealed that complaints had been filed but consistently dismissed by management. "I couldn't stay silent any longer," Jason explained in an interview. "What happened to Mr. Daniels wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the first one caught on video that couldn't be denied." 2 weeks after the incident, Sky America's strategy collapsed entirely when an internal memo leaked to the press. The document, written by a senior executive, outlined a plan to manage the optics of the incident by questioning Daniels' character rather than addressing the potentially widespread cultural issues within the company. The memo explicitly acknowledged that similar complaints had been suppressed previously. The backlash was immediate and severe. Sky America's stock plummeted to a 5-year low. Major institutional investors demanded leadership changes. Corporate clients accelerated their exodus to competitors who had partnered with the Equal Skies initiative. In a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation, Sky America's board called an emergency meeting and emerged with a stunning announcement. CEO Richard Blackwell had decided to step down, effective immediately. His replacement, Lydia Montgomery, the company's first black female executive, promised comprehensive cultural transformation and announced that Sky America would not only implement all the reforms Marcus had initially proposed, but would become the primary corporate sponsor of the Equal Skies initiative. As Marcus watched the press conference from his office in Atlanta, he felt a complex mix of emotions. There was vindication, certainly, but also a weariness born from the knowledge that his victory had come at a significant personal cost. For weeks he had endured character assassination, threats to his business, and the psychological toll of having his trauma dissected in public. His phone buzzed with a text from Amara. "You won. They're capitulating on every front." Had he won? Marcus wasn't sure. Real victory would mean no one else experiencing what he had endured. It would mean systemic change, not just at one airline but across an industry and beyond. It would mean a world where his success and achievements weren't constantly undermined by assumptions based on his skin color. As he prepared for a board meeting to discuss Horizon's path forward, Marcus touched the fading bruises on his neck, a reminder that justice, like healing, was a process rather than a destination. The incident on the plane had changed him, not just as a CEO, but as a man navigating a world that still questioned his right to occupy spaces he had earned through talent and hard work. The question now was how to transform this painful chapter into lasting change, not just for airlines, but for every industry and institution where such discrimination festered beneath polished corporate veneers. 6 months after the assault, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at the National Transportation Equity Conference in Washington, D.C. The physical bruises had long since faded, but the experience had left indelible marks on his life and career, reshaping his priorities and purpose. "When I boarded that flight 6 months ago," he began, his voice strong and clear, "I was focused on a business meeting that seemed critically important at the time. I never imagined that instead of discussing technology partnerships, I would find myself fighting for breath, for dignity, and ultimately, for change that extends far beyond one incident or one company." The audience, a mix of industry executives, policymakers, civil rights leaders, and transportation professionals, listened intently. In the front row sat familiar faces: Amara Williams, who had captured the viral video; Dr. Raymond Wilson, whose medical expertise had validated the seriousness of the assault; and Jason Chen, the flight attendant, who had risked his career to speak the truth. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Equal Skies Initiative has partnered with 27 airlines worldwide, representing over 70% of global air traffic, Marcus continued. Together, we've implemented standardized bias training for over 300,000 industry employees, established transparent reporting systems for passengers experiencing discrimination, and created accountability metrics tied directly to executive compensation. Applause rippled through the audience. On a screen behind him, statistics told a compelling story. Discrimination complaints had decreased by 38% across participating airlines. Response protocols had improved, with 94% of reported incidents now receiving investigation within 48 hours. Most importantly, employee satisfaction rates had actually increased under the new systems, contradicting fears that addressing bias would somehow damage morale. This progress wasn't easy, Marcus acknowledged. It required confronting uncomfortable truths. It demanded looking beyond individual actions to examine systemic failures. And yes, it faced resistance from those who preferred the status quo. The journey had indeed been arduous. Following Sky America's leadership change and public commitment to reform, other airlines had gradually joined the initiative, some enthusiastically embracing the opportunity for improvement, others reluctantly responding to market pressure as consumers increasingly factored equity practices into their travel decisions. Heather Richardson had ultimately pleaded guilty to assault charges, receiving probation and community service rather than jail time, an outcome Marcus had supported, believing rehabilitation more valuable than punishment. Patricia had been terminated after the internal investigation revealed a pattern of enabling discriminatory behavior. Both women were required to participate in restorative justice sessions, where they heard directly from passengers who had experienced discrimination under their watch. Sky America, under Lydia Montgomery's leadership, had transformed into an industry leader for inclusive practices. Their stock had not only recovered but surpassed previous highs as their commitment to equity attracted new customers and corporate accounts. "But the work we're doing extends beyond airlines," Marcus continued. "The transportation equity framework we've developed is now being adapted for hotels, restaurants, retail establishments, and healthcare facilities. Because what happened to me wasn't unique to air travel. It reflects patterns of discrimination that many face daily in spaces where they're seen as not belonging." In the months following the incident, Marcus had indeed expanded his focus. The Equal Skies Initiative had evolved into the Equal Access Foundation, broadening its mission to address discrimination across all consumer-facing industries. Horizon Technologies had created a new division specializing in AI systems designed to identify and mitigate bias in customer service interactions, technology now being implemented by companies worldwide. "My personal experience opened doors to conversations that were previously happening only in private," Marcus explained. Suddenly, executives who had dismissed discrimination concerns as isolated incidents or perception issues were forced to confront video evidence they couldn't deny, data they couldn't ignore, stories they couldn't dismiss. He shared how the foundation had collected over 50,000 testimonials from individuals who had experienced similar treatment, creating the largest database of consumer discrimination incidents ever assembled. This data was now informing policy recommendations at federal, state, and local levels. The question I'm asked most frequently is whether I regret what happened that day, Marcus said, his tone becoming more reflective. The honest answer is complicated. I would never choose to experience violence and humiliation. I would never wish that moment of terror, of literally fighting for breath, on anyone. But I cannot regret the awakening it triggered, both in me and in others. He described how the incident had transformed his approach to leadership at Horizon Technologies. The company had become an industry benchmark for inclusive practices, with recruitment, retention, and advancement rates for underrepresented groups far exceeding industry averages. Their innovative technology solutions were now being designed, with equity considerations from the ground up, rather than as afterthoughts. The most meaningful outcome, Marcus continued, has been the community that formed in response. People who were previously suffering in silence found their voices. Employees who wanted to create more equitable workplaces found resources and support. Companies that genuinely wanted to improve found practical frameworks to follow. The global tech partnership that had seemed so crucial 6 months ago had indeed materialized, but in an evolved form. Instead of simply expanding Horizon's existing products, the collaboration now focused on developing technologies that could help identify and address systemic inequities across industries. From hiring algorithms that minimized bias to customer service platforms that ensured consistent treatment regardless of race, gender, or other characteristics. We've transformed pain into progress, Marcus said, approaching his conclusion. But we must remain vigilant. Progress is not permanent. Unless we make it so, systems naturally resist change, and there will always be those who prefer comfort over justice. As he finished his address, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Among those applauding was a face that surprised him, Richard Blackwell, the former Sky America CEO, who had requested to attend after undergoing his own journey of reflection and education following his resignation. After the conference, at a small reception, Blackwell approached Marcus tentatively. "Mr. Daniels," he began, "I doubt you expected to see me here." "I didn't," Marcus acknowledged, "but I appreciate that you came." Blackwell nodded. "These past months have been illuminating. After losing my position, I had two choices: blame you for exposing problems I should have addressed, or take the opportunity to examine my own blind spots. I chose the latter, though it wasn't my first instinct." The conversation between them was brief but significant, not a friendship forming, but perhaps a small bridge across a divide that had once seemed uncrossable. It represented the kind of difficult dialogue that was happening in boardrooms, break rooms, and living rooms across the country as a result of that moment on the plane. Later that evening, in a quiet moment alone in his hotel room, Marcus video called his mother. At 73, Elaine Daniels remained his most trusted advisor and fiercest supporter. "You looked strong up there today," she told him, pride evident in her voice. "Your father would have been so proud." "I keep thinking about something you told me when I was young," Marcus replied. "After Dad was wrongfully imprisoned, when I was angry at the world, you said, 'Don't let injustice define you, but don't pretend it doesn't exist.'" Elaine smiled softly. "You've found that balance, using your platform to create change without letting the pain consume you." As they spoke, Marcus reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The assault had been a personal violation, but his response had created ripples far beyond his individual experience. Policies were changing, conversations were happening, awareness was growing. It wasn't perfect. There were still those who denied the reality of racism, who made excuses for discrimination, who resisted change, but meaningful progress was undeniable. His phone buzzed with a notification. The Equal Access Foundation app had just registered its 100,000th user. People across the country were using the platform to document their experiences, connect with resources, and hold companies accountable. What had begun as a viral video of one man's trauma had evolved into a movement for transparency and equity. "I never wanted to be the face of this issue," Marcus admitted to his mother. "But sometimes leadership means stepping into spaces you didn't choose." "That's always been your gift," Elaine replied. "Finding purpose even in pain. Building something meaningful from challenge." As the call ended, Marcus walked to the window overlooking the capital city's monuments illuminated against the night sky. The nation had been founded on ideals of equality that remained incompletely realized centuries later. His experience on that flight had become one more chapter in America's ongoing struggle to live up to its founding promises. Tomorrow, he would meet with legislators about proposed transportation equity legislation. Next week, Horizon Technologies would launch a new platform designed to help companies identify bias in their customer service interactions. The work continued, both professional and personal. Marcus touched the spot on his neck where the bruises had been. The physical marks had healed, but he carried other invisible imprints from that day. A deeper understanding of his role as a leader, a clearer vision of the change he wanted to create, and a renewed commitment to using his position and privilege to address injustices that affected countless others who didn't have his resources or platform. The assault on that plane could have been just another demoralizing reminder of persistent racism, another trauma to process privately while maintaining a professional facade. Instead, it had become a catalyst for transformation, not just for one airline or one industry, but for a society still struggling to acknowledge and address its deepest biases. As night settled over Washington, Marcus thought about all the people who had shared their stories after seeing his. From executives who had faced similar humiliations, to service workers who had witnessed discrimination, but felt powerless to intervene. Each testimony represented both a painful reality and an opportunity for change. "Progress isn't linear," Marcus whispered to himself, echoing words his father had written to him from prison decades ago. "But it is possible." He turned from the window, returning to the stack of reports and proposals awaiting his review. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new resistance, new opportunities to advance the cause of equity. The work was far from complete, but Marcus Daniels, the boy from Detroit who had overcome obstacle after obstacle to build his success, was prepared for the long journey ahead. The incident on that plane had changed him, but not in the way his attackers might have intended. It hadn't diminished him or forced him into silence. Instead, it had connected him to a community of changemakers and clarified his purpose beyond business success. His company continued to thrive. The Global Tech Partnership was revolutionizing inclusive technology, and the Equal Access Foundation was creating accountability in spaces where none had existed before. This wasn't the legacy Marcus had originally envisioned for himself, but as he prepared for tomorrow's meetings, he recognized it as perhaps more meaningful than anything he could have planned. Sometimes leadership found you in moments of crisis, sometimes purpose emerged from pain, and sometimes a single moment of injustice captured and shared could become the spark that illuminated paths toward a more equitable future. What do you think about Marcus's journey and the impact one person can make in transforming systemic issues? Has this story changed how you might respond if you witness discrimination? Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. If you believe these conversations about racial equality are important, please like and subscribe to support more stories that tackle difficult social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and let's continue building awareness together. Thank you for joining me for this powerful true story. I'm grateful for your time and attention, and hope it inspires positive action in your own life. This story reveals how racism persists even in spaces where achievement and success should transcend prejudice. Marcus's experience demonstrates that no amount of wealth, education, or professional accomplishment can fully shield Black Americans from discrimination. The incident highlights how quickly bias can escalate from microaggressions to physical danger, and how systems often protect perpetrators rather than victims. Yet Marcus's response offers powerful lessons in strategic advocacy. Rather than seeking personal vengeance, he channeled his trauma into systemic change. He recognized that firing individual employees wouldn't address the underlying culture that enabled their behavior. By creating institutional accountability through the Equal Access Foundation, he transformed a personal injury into collective progress. The story also underscores the critical role of documentation and allies. Without video evidence and witness support, Marcus might have been portrayed as the aggressor rather than the victim. This reality reflects how frequently discrimination goes unaddressed when there's no irrefutable proof. Ultimately, this narrative reminds us that change requires both personal courage and structural approach. One incident, properly leveraged, can become a catalyst for transformation that extends far beyond a single moment or individual experience.